The distress signal came at 300 hours, screaming across the void between stars. Commander Sarah Chen was drinking her third coffee of the night shift when the communications officer's face went pale. The young man's hands shook as he routed the transmission to her station. "This is New Gdansk Colony. We are under attack. They're burning everything. The cities are..." Static consumed the rest. Then silence, the kind of silence that meant death. Sarah's coffee cup shattered on the floor. "Get me a fleet. Now." 18 hours later, the rescue ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, expecting to find survivors, maybe some damaged buildings, perhaps a few enemy ships to chase away. What they found instead was a grave. New Gdansk had been home to 4,200,000 souls. Now it was nothing but melted glass and radioactive ash. Every city had been hit from orbit. Every town, every settlement. Even the research stations in the Arctic regions were gone. The forensic team worked for 3 days in their protective suits, scanning the ruins. They found no bodies. The orbital bombardment had been so intense that everything organic had simply vaporized. But the weapon signatures told a story written in radiation patterns and energy residue. "Gentar," the lead investigator said, his voice flat with shock. "The weapons are definitely Gentar military grade. Multiple capital ships sustained bombardment for at least 6 hours. Sarah felt her stomach turn to ice. The Gentar hegemony was not some rogue pirate gang. They were members of the Galactic Collective. They had a seat on the council. They were supposed to be civilized. More importantly, they had broken the only law that mattered. 200 years ago, when humanity had first reached the stars and met the 1,000 other species already there, they had found something unexpected. The galaxy was not united under one government. Instead, 10,000 different species had formed the Galactic Collective, and this collective had only one law. One single rule that every species had to follow: no genocide, no extermination. No species could wipe out another sentient race. Break this law and the entire collective would turn against you. At least that was the theory. That was the promise. Sarah wondered if anyone had ever actually tested it before. 3 weeks later, Ambassador Marcus Webb stood in the Great Chamber of the Galactic Council. The chamber was enormous, designed to hold representatives from all the major species. Gentar delegates sat in their section, looking calm and unconcerned. Their leader, High Commander Zartek, even seemed bored. Marcus played the evidence for everyone to see. Satellite footage of the Gentar fleet arriving, energy signatures matching their weapons, timeline analysis proving the colony had not fired first, had not even raised shields until the first shots hit. 4 million people murdered in cold blood. "The law is clear," Marcus said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Genocide demands justice. We demand the hegemony be held accountable." The council chambers filled with the sound of alien voices translating his words into thousands of languages. Then came the responses. The Gentar claimed self-defense. They said the colony had been building weapons, planning attacks, threatening their borders. All lies, and the evidence proved it, but the council did not act. Instead, they debated. They formed committees. They suggested mediation. The Earthile species, who were old friends of the Gentar, proposed reparations. Money and resources instead of justice. The Vexner suggested a joint investigation that would take years. Marcus watched this circus for 5 days. 5 days of speeches and procedures and diplomatic language. 5 days while the ashes of New Gdansk grew cold. On the 6th day, he stood up during a committee session and spoke without being called on. 200 years ago, humanity joined the collective because you promised us something, he said. You told us there was one law that held everything together. One rule that protected every species from the nightmare of extinction. You said that if anyone broke this law, everyone would respond. He pointed at the Gentar delegation. They broke it. 4 million human beings are dead, and you won't do anything. The chamber erupted in protests. The council speaker demanded he sit down and follow proper procedure. Marcus ignored them all. Humanity is withdrawing from the collective effective immediately, he announced. We will enforce the law ourselves since you won't. And when we're done, you can decide if you want to let us back in. He walked out. Behind him, the council dissolved into chaos. The news reached Earth within hours. It spread across every human world in the next day. And everywhere humans lived, the response was the same. Fury Fleet Admiral James Kowalski had retired 5 years ago after 40 years of service. He was tending his garden when the call came. He listened to the full report in silence. Then he put down his gardening tools and went to find his old uniform. Across human space, the same scene repeated. Veterans came out of retirement. Reserve fleets activated. Shipyards that had been building trade vessels switched to warships. Colony militias started training exercises. Mining stations began processing metals for armor plating. The galaxy thought humanity would negotiate. They expected angry words and maybe a small retaliatory strike before settling down to talk. They were wrong. Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Retribution, newly promoted to captain. Around her, the largest human fleet ever assembled prepared for departure. 800 warships. Not much compared to the massive armadas of older species. But every single ship carried people who remembered what they'd seen at New Gdansk. Every Marine had volunteered knowing they might not come home. Every pilot had sworn an oath that had nothing to do with their military service. They were going to enforce the law, no matter the cost. Admiral James Kowalski looked at the tactical display and allowed himself a thin smile. The Gentar had no idea what was coming for them. Behind humanity's closed borders, the mobilization had been total. Every shipyard worked around the clock. Every factory that could produce weapons did so. Every able-bodied human who could fight had volunteered. Within 3 months, humanity had assembled not just a fleet, but an armada of vengeance. The other species of the collective watched this build-up with concern, but no real fear. Humanity was a young species. They had been in space for only 300 years. Their technology was adequate but not exceptional. The Gentar hegemony commanded 4,000 warships and had been conquering systems for 10,000 years. What the galaxy failed to understand was that humans had never stopped preparing for war. While other species built beautiful art and composed symphonies during peacetime, humans built bunkers and weapon stockpiles. While others assumed the collective would protect them, humans assumed they would always have to protect themselves. Every human warship had redundant systems. Backup generators for the backup generators. Manual overrides for everything. They were designed by a species that remembered their own world wars, their own near extinctions, their own nuclear standoffs. A species that knew civilization could end in fire at any moment. Admiral Kowalski sent a single message to the Gentar hegemony. It was translated into their language perfectly. You have 72 hours to surrender your leadership for trial. Dismantle your military. Submit to occupation and judgment. This is your only warning. High Commander Zartek received the message and laughed. His advisors laughed with him. The idea that humanity with its tiny fleet could threaten the mighty hegemony was absurd. Humans were barely out of their home system when the Gentar had already conquered 47 worlds. Zartek sent his own message back. Come and die, primates. He ordered his Grand Armada to the human border. 4,000 ships jumped into the threshold system, expecting to crush any resistance and then push onward to burn human colonies as a lesson. The threshold system appeared empty. Sensors showed no human ships, no stations, nothing. The Gentar fleet advanced cautiously, spreading out in standard formation. Then the system came alive. Mines that had been floating cold and silent suddenly activated. Missile platforms that looked like asteroids opened fire. The entire stellar region had been turned into a weapon. Autonomous drones swarmed from hidden positions. Gravity well generators activated, preventing ships from jumping back to faster-than-light speeds. The Gentar fleet tried to return fire, but the human weapons were everywhere and nowhere. Missiles came from every direction. Mines tracked individual ships with frightening accuracy, and then the human fleet itself appeared, dropping out of FTL in perfect attack formation. The battle lasted 14 hours. It was not elegant. It was not honorable. It was slaughter. Human ships rammed Gentar vessels when their ammunition ran low. Boarding pods fired into enemy hulls, and human Marines fought through corridors in zero gravity. Kamikaze drones filled with explosives threw themselves at capital ships. Human captains used tactics that other species considered insane, like intentionally venting their own atmosphere to put out fires, or overloading reactors to create makeshift bombs. When it was over, 3,200 Gentar ships were debris. The survivors fled in panic, jumping blind to any system that might offer escape. Admiral Kowalski did not celebrate. He simply gave the order, pursue them. The human fleet followed the fleeing Gentar back to their own territory. This violated every rule of civilized warfare. When an enemy retreated, you were supposed to let them go. You were supposed to negotiate. You were supposed to show mercy. Humanity showed none. The chase lasted for weeks. Every time a Gentar ship stopped to refuel or repair, human vessels appeared and destroyed it. Gentar colony worlds watched in horror as their military fled past them with humanity in pursuit. When Captain Sarah Chen's ship caught a fleeing Gentar destroyer near their colony of Reshvar, the enemy captain broadcast a surrender. He powered down weapons and shields following all the proper protocols. Sarah's communications officer looked at her. "Captain, they're surrendering." Sarah remembered the images from New Gdansk, the melted cities, the vaporized children, the 4 million people who never got a chance to surrender. "The law was absolute," she said quietly. "So is our response. Continue firing. The destroyer was destroyed. No survivors." The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Some species demanded they intervene to stop humanity. The Vexnor proposed sending peacekeepers. The Arthal suggested economic sanctions, but other species pointed out the obvious problem. Humanity was enforcing the collective's own law. The law that said genocide could not be tolerated. The law that the Council had refused to enforce. The debate paralyzed the Council for weeks. Meanwhile, 3 other species quietly began arresting Gentar officials within their territories. They didn't want humanity coming for them next. The human fleet pushed deep into Gentar space with terrifying efficiency. They didn't target civilians. They didn't bomb cities or farms or hospitals. But military bases were obliterated. Shipyards were reduced to scrap. Command centers were vaporized. Government buildings were destroyed. The Gentar military, which had seemed so powerful, crumbled. Their defenses were designed for conventional warfare between civilized species. Species that followed rules and worried about casualties and retreated when the odds turned bad. Humans didn't retreat. They took losses that would make any other species surrender and then kept coming. Intercepted Gentar communications showed growing terror. They had never fought an enemy like this. An enemy that treated every battle like it was their last. One Gentar officer, shortly before his base was overrun, sent a message that was picked up by multiple species intelligence services. They don't fight like soldiers. They fight like the universe is ending and they have nothing left to lose. How do you defeat an enemy that has already accepted death? Within 3 months, the Gentar hegemony collapsed. Worlds rebelled against their central government. Leaders fled or tried to surrender separately. The mighty empire that had lasted 10,000 years fell apart in less than a season. The human fleet arrived at the Gentar homeworld on a Tuesday morning. For the Gentar people below, it was the most terrifying moment in their species' history. Their sky filled with foreign warships, weapons pointed downward. Admiral Kowalski broadcast a message on every frequency, in every language spoken on the planet. "We are not here to exterminate you. We are not here to enslave you. We are here for those who ordered the genocide of New Gdansk. You have 24 hours to surrender every official who planned, ordered, or executed that attack. If you do not comply, we will come down and take them ourselves." In the capital city of Jartek, the hegemony's government went into chaos. Some officials tried to flee off-world. Human ships shot them down. Others tried to hide among the civilian population. Human intelligence had already identified them all. A few suggested fighting, but their military was gone. Destroyed across a dozen systems. The Gentar premier, a female named Kresheva who had not been in power during the attack, made the only decision she could. 8 hours after the deadline was given, she broadcast a message: "We surrender. All individuals involved in the New Gdansk genocide will be turned over to human custody. We ask only that you do not punish our civilians for the crimes of our leaders." The galaxy watched this unfold with growing unease. Some species expressed outrage at humanity's aggression. The Arthal ambassador called it barbarism. The Vexnor suggested humanity was becoming the very thing they claimed to oppose. But younger species, especially those who had joined the collective more recently, had a different reaction. They watched humanity do exactly what the collective had promised to do but never did. They saw a species actually enforcing the law that supposedly protected them all. On the human networks, the mood was grim rather than celebratory. Yes, they had won. Yes, they had brought the Gentar to justice. But the cost had been enormous. 78,000 human military personnel had died in the campaign. Every human world held memorial services. Every family knew someone who hadn't come home. Captain Sarah Chen attended the funeral of her weapons officer, Lieutenant Park. He had died when his station exploded during the Battle of Threshold. She stood with his family and said the words expected of her. But privately, she wondered if this was victory or just a different kind of defeat. The Gentar leadership was collected and transported to New Gdansk. Over 4,000 individuals were arrested. Military officers who had commanded the bombardment, government officials who had ordered it, intelligence officers who had planned it, even the logistics personnel who had organized the fleet movements. Humanity was thorough. Every person who had played a role, no matter how small, was identified and detained. They established a tribunal on the surface of New Gdansk itself. The trials were held in a temporary structure built on the exact spot where the colony's main hospital had stood. 4 million people had died here. The accused would stand where their victims had died. Ambassador Marcus Webb oversaw the proceedings personally. The trials were broadcast across the entire galaxy, translated into every known language. Humanity wanted everyone to see. They wanted the evidence to be undeniable. They wanted the process to be legal and documented. Each defendant was allowed legal representation. Each was allowed to present a defense. The Gentar government hired the best lawyers from a dozen different species. Every case was heard fairly, but the evidence was overwhelming. Communications logs showed the orders being given. Battle recorder data showed the attacks being carried out. Timeline analysis proved the colony had not threatened anyone. Forensic evidence confirmed the weapons used. One by one, the defendants were found guilty. 3,847 individuals were convicted of genocide under both human law and the collective's founding charter. The judges spent 3 days reviewing the sentences, looking for any reason to show mercy, any mitigating factor. They found none. Under human military law, the sentence for genocide was death. Under the collective's own founding documents, the punishment for breaking the only law was removal from the protection of that law. The judges had no choice. The executions were carried out over 30 days. 130 individuals per day. Humanity made them public, made them documented, made them permanent record, not to be cruel, but to ensure that every species in the galaxy understood the cost of breaking the law. Each execution was preceded by a reading of the charges and a moment of silence for the victims. Each defendant was allowed final words. Some apologized. Some remained defiant. Some begged for mercy they had not shown New Gdansk. None were spared. The galaxy reacted with horror, disgust, understanding, and fear in various measures. The Arthal formally condemned humanity as monsters. The Vexenor severed diplomatic relations, but dozens of other species remained silent or quietly expressed support. The Krell, a species that had nearly been exterminated by the Vexenor 2 centuries ago, before the collective intervened, sent a private message to humanity. Thank you for proving the law actually means something. When the last execution was carried out, Admiral Kowalski stood at the memorial that had been erected at New Gdansk. 4 million names carved into black stone. He placed his hand on the memorial and spoke quietly. It's done. Justice is served. I hope you can rest now. He didn't feel victorious. He felt tired and old and sad. But he also felt something else. Certainty. The law had been enforced. The precedent had been set. Perhaps, just perhaps, no one would dare break the law again. Ambassador Marcus Webb returned to the Galactic Council. Many expected a long speech. Instead, he said only this: "We enforced your law because you wouldn't. The Covenant of Stars still stands and humanity will honor it. But understand this clearly. If any species commits genocide again, we will respond again exactly as we did here. We will always respond. That is humanity's promise and humanity's burden." He sat down. The council chamber was silent for a full minute. Then the Krell ambassador started a slow, rhythmic tapping on his desk, a sign of respect in his culture. One by one, other species joined in. Not all of them, but enough. The galaxy had learned something important. The law protecting them from extinction was not just words anymore. It had teeth, and those teeth were human. 5 years after New Gdansk, the galaxy had changed in ways both visible and hidden. The Gentar hegemony no longer existed. In its place were 7 smaller nations, each trying to distance themselves from their shared past. The Gentar people themselves had become divided. Some felt shame for what their leaders had done. Others felt anger at humanity for the destruction. Most just wanted to rebuild and be left alone. Humanity had changed too. They had proven they could wage war as effectively as any species in the galaxy. Maybe more effectively. But the cost had left scars. War memorials stood on every human world now. Children grew up hearing stories about New Gdansk, about the fleet that had avenged it, about the price paid for justice. Captain Sarah Chen, now promoted to Commodore, visited New Gdansk twice a year. The memorial had grown. Survivors from other colonies added names of loved ones lost in different tragedies. It had become a place of remembrance for all of humanity's dead, not just those from the genocide. She stood there on the 5th anniversary, watching families place flowers and say prayers. A young Gentar female approached her nervously. The girl couldn't have been more than 20 years old, barely more than a child by their species standards. "Commodore Chen," the girl said in heavily accented human language. "My name is Vreshka. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what my people did." Sarah looked at her for a long moment. This girl had probably been 15 when the attack happened. She bore no responsibility for it. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, "but you don't need to apologize for crimes you didn't commit." "My grandfather was one of the officers," Vreshka continued, tears forming. "He was executed. I used to hate humans for that. But then I learned what he had done, what they all had done, and I understood." She placed a small bundle of flowers at the memorial. "I'm studying to be a doctor now. I want to help people, not hurt them. I want to prove that not all Gentar are monsters." Sarah put a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You already have." The Galactic Council had spent the last 5 years debating what to do about humanity. Some species wanted them punished for their aggression. Others wanted them welcomed back. But everyone agreed on one thing. The old system had failed. The vote came on a cold morning in the council chambers. Every species sent representatives. The proposal was simple. Establish the enforcement mandate. Any species that committed genocide would face immediate military intervention by the collective as a whole. No debates, no committees, no mediation. The law would have teeth. The vote was not unanimous. The Arthal abstained. The Vexnor voted against it. But 347 species voted in favor. The measure passed overwhelmingly. Why? Because everyone knew that humanity would enforce the law regardless of what the council decided. Better to make it official and controlled. Better to have a say in how it was done. Better to join humanity than oppose them. The enforcement mandate came with a proposal. Create a dedicated fleet for this purpose. A fleet with ships and personnel from all willing species, but led by those who had proven they would actually use it. Led by humanity. Admiral Kowalski, who had tried to retire again after the war, was asked to take command of this Guardian fleet. He stood before the council and asked them a simple question. "If I take this role, I will not hesitate. If any species breaks the law, I will act immediately and decisively. Can you accept that?" There was silence. Then the Krell ambassador stood. "Admiral, my species was nearly exterminated 200 years ago. The collective stopped the killing, but only after 80% of my people were dead. They debated while we died. You have shown that you will not debate. You will act. I would trust you with my people's survival." 3 dozen other ambassadors stood in agreement. Kowalski accepted the command. The Guardian fleet was established with 100 ships from humanity and 50 more from other species. It wasn't the largest fleet in the galaxy, but it was the most feared. Every captain and crew member was a volunteer who understood the mission. They would be the sword that enforced the law. The fleet's motto was simple. Never again means never. They established rapid response protocols, intelligence networks to identify potential genocides before they happened, contingency plans for every known aggressive species. The Guardian fleet didn't wait in one place. They patrolled constantly, showing the flag, reminding everyone that the law was real. Within 2 years, they responded to 3 potential situations. In each case, they arrived before any killing started. In each case, the aggressive species backed down immediately when human ships appeared. The Guardian fleet never had to fire a shot. Their reputation did the work for them, but not everyone was happy with the new order. Some species resented humanity's role. They called it imperialism disguised as peacekeeping. The Arthal in particular became vocal critics, claiming humanity had too much power. Ambassador Webb addressed these concerns in a council session. "We don't want this power. he said. "We'd much rather build colonies and explore the galaxy in peace. But someone has to enforce the law. Someone has to be willing to act when others won't. If any species here wants to take that burden from us, we'll gladly let them. But until then, we'll carry it." No one volunteered. Years passed. The galaxy adjusted to its new reality. Trade continued. Diplomacy continued. Art and science flourished. But underneath it all was a new understanding. The law was not just words. Break it, and humans would come for you. Most species found this comforting. They could build their civilizations knowing that the worst crime was truly prevented. A few species found it threatening. They didn't like being told what they could and couldn't do, but they obeyed anyway. Because New Gdansk stood as a monument to what happened when you didn't. Sarah Chen, now an admiral herself and second in command of the Guardian fleet, received a message one evening from an old Gentar contact. It was brief. "Thank you for not destroying us. Thank you for showing us a better way. We're trying to be worthy of the mercy you showed." She read it twice, then filed it away with the dozens of others like it she'd received over the years. Mercy. They called it mercy because humanity hadn't exterminated the Gentar species in return. Because they had only punished the guilty, was that mercy, or just following the law they claimed to enforce? Sarah wasn't sure anymore. But she knew one thing with certainty. The law stood. And as long as humanity existed, it would continue to stand. 10 years after New Gdansk, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy peace. The Guardian fleet patrolled the spaceways, a constant reminder that the law had teeth. Trade flourished between systems. Science expeditions mapped new worlds. Artists from 100 species collaborated on works that bridged cultures. But the memory of what humanity had done never faded. The Gentar successor states had rebuilt slowly. Human aid workers and engineers had flooded their territory in the years after the war, helping stabilize infrastructure and prevent collapse. This had confused many Gentar at first. Why would humanity help rebuild what they had destroyed? Admiral Kowalski explained it simply during a press conference. "We punish the guilty. The Gentar people are not guilty of their leaders' crimes. Chaos and suffering help no one. A stable galaxy is safer for everyone." But underneath the practical reasoning was something else. Humanity remembered its own history. They remembered times when entire populations had been blamed for the actions of their governments. They remembered the suffering that followed. They had chosen a different path. The youngest generation of Gentar grew up learning about New Gdansk in their schools. Not as propaganda, but as history. They learned what their former leaders had done. They learned about the law and why it existed. They learned that humanity had enforced justice without crossing the line into vengeance. Most of them grew up with a complicated view of humans. Fear, yes, but also respect. And for some, gratitude. Captain Marcus Webb Jr., son of the famous ambassador, commanded a patrol frigate in the Guardian fleet. He had been only 15 when New Gdansk burned. Now he was 30, with a decade of service behind him. Today he was responding to a distress call from a minor species called the Trelvan. The Trelvan had 6 colony worlds and no real military. Their neighbors, the Korthan Empire, had been making aggressive moves for months. Border incidents, trade restrictions, propaganda about Trelvan terrorists. The pattern was familiar to anyone who studied history. When Marcus's ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel in the Trelvan home system, he found a Korthan battle fleet preparing to bombard the capital city. Their weapons were hot. Their targeting systems were active. They had 15 minutes from firing. Marcus opened a channel on all frequencies. "This is the Guardian Fleet Vessel Remembrance. Stand down immediately or be destroyed." The Korthan fleet commander responded with contempt. "This is an internal matter. The collective has no authority here." "The collective has absolute authority regarding genocide," Marcus replied calmly. "You have 30 seconds to power down your weapons and withdraw. If you fire on that city, we will consider it an act of genocide and respond accordingly. You're one ship. We have 40 vessels. You dare threaten us?" Marcus looked at his tactical officer and nodded. The officer transmitted a file to the Korthan fleet. It was simple. Just a list of names and dates. Gentar officers and officials. And next to each name the word executed. "We killed an empire for breaking the law," Marcus said quietly. "What do you think we'll do to you?" The Korthan weapons powered down. Their fleet jumped away within 5 minutes. They never returned. Marcus sent a report to Admiral Kowalski afterward. Threat resolved without firing a shot. The Trelvan are safe. Kowalski read the report and felt old. This was what they had become, a species so feared that their mere presence prevented wars. Was that good? He honestly didn't know. But it was necessary. The Galactic Council held a special session on the 10th anniversary of the enforcement mandate. Representatives from 400 species attended. Ambassador Marcus Webb Sr., now gray-haired but still sharp, stood to speak. 10 years ago, we enforced a law that many thought was just symbolic. Since then, the Guardian fleet has responded to 43 potential genocides. Not once have we had to fire our weapons. The law now works through deterrence rather than punishment. That's progress. The Krell ambassador stood. Humanity has become the guardian of galactic peace. Some resent this, but my people remember what happened when there were no guardians. We remember 80% of our population dying while the council debated. We prefer this new reality. Not everyone agreed. The Arthal ambassador spoke passionately about sovereignty and independence. The Vexenor complained about human military presence in their region, but they were voices of a minority now. Most species had accepted the new order, because the alternative was worse. After the session, Marcus met privately with Admiral Kowalski. The old admiral was 70 now, planning his retirement for real this time. "I'm tired, Marcus," Kowalski said. "I've spent 15 years making sure people are too afraid to commit genocide. That's not how I wanted to spend my life." "But it worked," Marcus replied. "How many millions of lives have been saved because aggressors knew you would respond?" "Maybe. Or maybe we've just delayed the problem. Sooner or later, someone will test us again, and we'll have to do it all over. Kill thousands to save millions. Burn fleets to enforce peace." Marcus had no answer for that. It was the burden humanity had chosen to carry. The burden of being the enforcer. Sarah Chen, now Fleet Admiral and commander of all Guardian Fleet operations, stood on the bridge of the dreadnought New Gdansk. They had named the flagship after the massacre, ensuring no one would forget why they existed. She was 50 years old now. Half her life spent in the military. Her hair was starting to gray. She had scars from 3 different boarding actions. She had attended more funerals than she could count. But she also had letters. Thousands of letters from species across the galaxy, thanking humanity for protecting them, for enforcing the law, for ensuring their children could grow up without fear of extermination. A young ensign approached her. "Admiral, we just received a transmission from the Trelvan government. They want to formally thank us for saving them from the Korthan." Sarah smiled slightly. "Send them our standard response. We're glad we could help. We hope we never have to help them again." She walked to the observation deck and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 4 million people had died because someone broke the law, and humanity had responded with overwhelming force to ensure it never happened again. Had they done the right thing? History would judge that, but Sarah knew one thing with certainty. The law stood. Species that had no military of their own could sleep safely knowing that if someone tried to exterminate them, help would come. That had to count for something. Her communicator buzzed. Her executive officer's voice came through. "Admiral, we just picked up a priority alert. The Ventar species is reporting military movements in their space. Might be nothing, but the Guardian protocols require us to investigate." Sarah sighed and turned away from the window. "Prepare the fleet for jump. Let's make sure it stays nothing." As the New Gdansk and its escort ships prepared to depart, Sarah thought about something her old commander had once told her. Sometimes you don't prevent war by being peaceful. You prevent it by being so terrifying that no one dares break the peace. It wasn't the future humanity had wanted. They had hoped the galaxy would be civilized enough to not need enforcers. They had hoped the law would stand on its own merit. But hope wasn't enough. The galaxy needed guardians, and humanity, for better or worse, had become those guardians. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speeds, racing toward another potential crisis. Behind them, billions of beings across thousands of worlds went about their lives in peace. They built homes and raised families and created art and discovered science. They lived without fear of genocide. They lived because humanity had drawn a line in the stars and dared anyone to cross it. The law stood. Never again meant never. And as long as humans existed, they would enforce those words with blood and steel if necessary. It was a terrible burden. But someone had to carry it. And humanity had proven they were willing to bear that weight so others didn't have to.